Hello, everyone, and welcome to Literary Tales. I'm your host, Paul Krause, and in this episode, we explore the great French medieval poem, the Song of Roland. The Song of Roland is a stirring French medieval poem and classic of medieval literature. It is the most well-known chanson de geste and is an exhilarating and remarkable synthesis of the Frankish, heroic, and tribal tradition and Christianity. The poem manages to combine the Frankish virtues and values of honor, heroism, and fealty with the Christian theology of love, truth, and wisdom in a dazzling tale that truly represents the birth of the literary genius of medieval Christendom. That mixture of the heroic tradition of Frankish Saxon tribalism and the theological virtues of Christianity, which eventually culminated in Torquato Tasso's Jerusalem Delivered in the 16th century. Though the poem's author remains anonymous, the poet sets the tale in a historical context. The historical situatedness of the poem is the late 8th century, in the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Tours and the Frankish defeat of Islamic forces that had conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula and invaded southern France. Charlemagne, not yet the emperor of Christendom, though stated to be emperor in the poem, had forged an alliance with the Abbasid Caliphate to afford him a campaign against the breakaway caliphate power in Iberia, the Umayyad Caliphate, now centered in Cordoba. Having an alliance with the Baghdad caliphs, Charlemagne, with the invitation from pro-Abbasid emirs in northern Spain, invaded the Pyrenees and began a long campaign against the Muslims in Spain. The battle of which the poem sings is loosely based on a historical battle, the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass, where Basque troops ambushed the rear guard of Charlemagne's forces and annihilated it. The date of the poem's composition is still debated. Some favor an early date, around the 1030s or 1040s, while others prefer a later date around the year 1100. The later date argument rests on the obvious theological drama of the poem. Christianity is represented by the Franks. Paganism is represented by the Saracens of King Marseille and the Islamic religion that they profess. Moreover, the 12th century dating also puts the poem at the birth of the chanson de geste genre, which included a trilogy of heroic poems dealing with the Crusades, known in English as the Crusade cycle. The argument for the late date rests upon the assumption that the poem reflects the realities of the First Crusade and the battle between Christianity and Islam, which is also apparent in the poem. This, however, is somewhat inconsequential to us, given the intensity of the poem and its values and symbolism, which doesn't depend on the early or later date of the poem, to which we are principally concerned with in this lecture. The poem is filled with grand characters, given tremendous description. We are told of gallant knights and feudal lords, with names, swords, and horses, reminiscent of that feudal mythological past coming out of late antiquity and the movement into the medieval world. We are told of their shiny armor, gold-plated shields, and glistening rings and necklaces. We are told of men with broad and noble physiques, long beards, and fierce eyes. The men of the poem come to life in a deeply picturesque way. But it is in these characters that the poem communicates the values and virtues that the poet found important. The battle between Christianity and paganism that pervades the poem is not just a theological struggle. It is also a battle between fealty and truth, against treachery and deceit. The characters who are lauded in the poem are depicted as being true vassals, and honorable and heroic men, men who speak wisdom and truth and do not deceive those around them. The characters who are excoriated are depicted as conniving traitors and deceitful liars, whose treacheries and lies are the cause of their own demise. As such, the feudal values of 11th and 12th century France are now theologized and married to Christianity, while the negative values of 11th and 12th century France are associated with pagan Saracenism. Anyone familiar with Dante, or those who have listened to my Dante lectures, will immediately see and notice the theological similarity between what is being communicated in the Song of Roland and what is communicated in the Inferno, where Dante places those who lie, engage in treachery, and those who deceive in the lowest rungs of hell. There are 4 principal characters in the poem: Roland, Charlemagne, Marseille, and Ganelon. Even though Roland's companions Oliver and Archbishop Turpin are also central characters, I am not going to include them in this discussion, principally because they already embody and exhibit what Roland largely embodies and exhibits in his life, that is, fealty. The principal characters of the drama embody the values, positive and negative, that feudal France would have understood and known well. Charlemagne is the simplest character to understand. He is the head of the feudal system and the emperor and king of the fair land of France. He is both general and missionary, king and servant. Charlemagne's first introduction is in the opening lines of the poem. "Charles the King, our great emperor," the poet announces. Charlemagne's first speaking lines come after a successful campaign against King Marseille, the poet's invented king of Iberia. Charlemagne is contemplating returning home and enjoying the fruits of peace when the song begins. There is a certain democratic atmosphere in the council in which the principal characters are introduced. Democracy here is not the rule of the people, as much as it is reflective of that older Anglo-Saxon and Frankish tradition of oligarchic and aristocratic self-rule, which eventually morphed into civil self-rule in England and the United States. Though Charlemagne is recounted as emperor and king, to which he does have final authority, he nonetheless asks for advice from his noble lords. It is in the Council of War and Peace that Roland and Ganelon are introduced as offering advice to the emperor. Roland suspects Marseille of treachery and makes this bluntly known to all around him. Marseille and his emissaries, as understood by Charlemagne, wants peace. They are even going as far as to sacrifice their sons and convert to Christianity to save their power. But the Saracens are obviously deceitful in their intentions. At least this is what Roland suspects and says. While Charlemagne is skeptical of Marseille's offer, the allure of the fair land of France and the possibility to enjoy peace are extremely enticing to the war-weary Franks. Though skeptical of Marseille's intention, Charlemagne seeks peace and a return to home. It is Roland, therefore, who acts as the buttress against Saracen deception. When Roland speaks, he reminds the council that the Saracens have not been trustworthy since the war began. If they have never been trustworthy before, why should they be trusted now? As he reminds all, King Marseille committed a most treacherous act. He sent 15 of his pagans, each bearing an olive branch. They addressed you with these very same words. You sought advice from your Franks, and they counseled you in a somewhat reckless fashion. You sent 2 of your counts, He took their heads on the hills beneath the Haltile. Roland's speech reminds us of the deceit and treachery that Marseille has already committed and shown himself willing to commit to hold on to power. Through Roland's speech, we witness the manifestation of the struggle that moves the poem between truth and deceit, which is reflected and embodied in tribal fealty even unto death. Roland is trustworthy. He gives the wise advice of the council's deliberation, thus establishing Roland as a wise and heroic baron to Charlemagne. But he is overruled by his stepfather, Ganelon. There is, on closer inspection, a long-standing rivalry and jealousy between Ganelon and Roland. The two intensely dislike each other. One can go as far as to say that they hate each other. In fact, Ganelon pronounces his hatred for Roland during and after the council, in which he is selected by Charlemagne to meet with the Saracen king. Ganelon believes he will die on this mission, though Charlemagne's will, as lord and king, must be obeyed. Ganelon curses his compatriots as he leaves. Ganelon is introduced in negative terms. Ganelon came, who committed the act of treason, is how the poet introduces him, with the assumption that the listeners and the readers already know the story. The poet, mind you, takes great deliberate construction on this respective aspect. Whenever Ganelon is around and speaks, the poet makes clear that he is the one who betrayed Roland and, more importantly, betrayed Charlemagne. As such, Ganelon betrayed all of France and the very virtues and values that fair France and Christianity are meant to represent. But the poet also describes Ganelon as a tempting figure. He is truly a prince of this world. In this respect, Ganelon is based on the greatest traitor and rebel of all time, Lucifer. Like Lucifer, Ganelon is well-spoken and a dashing and handsome figure. The poet describes Ganelon's earthly appearance in glowing terms. His eyes flashed, his face was very fierce, his body was noble, his torso broad. So handsome was he that all his peers gaze at him. When Ganelon arrives at the court of King Marseille to make peace between the two kings, he hatches a plan to kill Roland, under the pretext that if Roland lives, the two great kingdoms will forever be at war. After all, that is what Roland was advocating during the council. Through his own deceit and treachery, Ganelon acts in a manner where he could defend himself as having complied with Charlemagne's will, but also having rid himself of the thorn in his side, Roland. As Ganelon says, if anyone killed Roland, we should then all have peace. To underscore the depravity of Ganelon's actions, as Ganelon discusses with Blancandrin, King Marseille's principal advisor, the plan to kill Roland and secure peace, the poet interjects his disapproval of the treachery that is going on. They took Ganelon by the fingers of his right hand, and they led him to the king in the garden. There they planned the wicked act of treason, the poet sings. When Ganelon convinces King Marseille of ambushing Roland and Charlemagne and the army, when they are returning to France, the poet again reiterates the depravity of Ganelon's actions when he seals his pact with the Saracens, saying, they swore the treason and committed their crime. After devising the plan of battle, Ganelon is showered with praise by the Saracen nobles. They call him a truly noble man, though the audience, thanks to the poet, knows otherwise. The various nobles also give Ganelon many gifts, swords, necklaces, jewels, and more. Ganelon wins the affections of this world, and his treasures are all of this world. Ganelon wins earthly prizes for his treachery, and is therefore barred from the gates of paradise, which, as we shall see, is open to those who uphold fealty, even unto death. In the poem, not only is Ganelon the devil in disguise, but also he mirrors the other great biblical traitor found in the New Testament. As the battle rages, the poet alludes to Judas in conjunction with Ganelon's treachery. As Charlemagne weeps for Roland and his brave lords being killed in battle, the poet says, Charlemagne was ill-served, that by Ganelon, who went to Saragossa to sell his household. He was later to lose his life and limbs. In the trial at Aix, he was condemned to hang, and 30 of his relatives with him, who did not expect to die. Here Ganelon morphs from Lucifer incarnate to Judas incarnate. Ganelon's betrayal of Charlemagne echoes the biblical testament of Judas's betrayal of Jesus for 30 pieces of silver by the 30 of his relatives that died with him. Moreover, just as Judas hung himself and lost life and limb, so too will Ganelon be hung and lose life and limb in the process. Treachery is a most serious crime and sin, as those who have read Dante's Inferno know, where Judas is in the lowest rung of hell, one of 3 individuals being gnawed on by Satan himself. The poet reinforces the depiction of Ganelon as a Judas during his trial scene near the conclusion of his work. Charlemagne declares, Ganelon betrayed the 12 peers for money, another direct allusion to Judas. King Marseille, the pagan Saracen and ruler of in the poem, is the embodiment of deceitfulness and worldly power, and therefore serves as the contrast to Charlemagne's noble character. Interestingly enough, the poem opens in Marseille's court after a brief invocation of Charlemagne as Lord and Emperor. Marseille and Blancandrin, the king's wicked advisor, deliberate how to best maintain their rule, despite the defeats they have suffered from Charlemagne and his forces. That is when they devise the plan to offer peace by swearing fealty and false conversion. The intent is to buy time to rebuild and strike later. Unlike Ganelon, Marseille and the pagan Saracens are not traitors. They are, however, untrustworthy and deceitful people. They are interested solely in power. As previously mentioned, they are willing to go as far as offering their sons as a sacrifice to temporarily gain peace and to recover their forces, to do battle and defeat Charlemagne later. Though not traitors in the way Ganelon is, the pagan Saracens in the poem embody everything contrary to the virtues and values of Frankish fealty, loyalty, and loving servitude. Through the contrast of Marseille with Charlemagne and Roland, the poet presents Christianity as the religion in which trust and loving fealty reaches its highest aspirations. Paganism, which is really Saracenism or Islam in the poem, is cast as the dialectical opposite of Christianity. Those who seek power and are willing to lie and steal to obtain power, or simply to hold power, cannot be good Christians or even good vassals. Pagan Saracenism reveals itself as being incompatible with being a good lord. In short, pagan Saracenism, as recounted in the poem, forsakes fealty and leads to death, as we shall see. Therefore, Marseille embodies the antithetical ideals and values of Charlemagne, Roland, and Christianity. The heart of the poem is the battle, where Roland and his companions die. The battle is the instantiation of the values of tribal fealty that the poet is promoting. The Franks, under Roland, show themselves to be pious Christians and good vassals in their heroic stand against Marseille's army. They all eventually perish for their lord and land. During the battle narrative, the thematic contrast between truth and deceit is also coursing through the lines, as men have their limbs hacked off and entrails spilled out over the field. The first 3 pagans to die fall because they all utter a lie, which demands them to be cut down. Alroth, Duke Falseron, and King Corsiblix die because they all utter something inconceivable, that is, a lie against Charlemagne, Roland, and the Franks. Lying, as an astute reader realizes in the poem, is tied to death. Every character that lies at some point in the poem is ultimately cut down. Archbishop Turban says it best when he kills Corsiblix. "Vile pagan, you have told a lie. Charlemagne, my lord, will always guard us well." Not only are the pagan warriors who speak lies during the battle struck down, so too is the greatest liar of them all, Ganelon, struck down by the poem's end. One should note the difference in how characters die. The liars die horrendously. While it is true that Roland and his compatriots die not because they told a lie, but because they are truthful to their fealty and their loyal oaths to the king, their deaths are met with a reception into heaven. We will discuss that more in a bit. To help underscore the negativity of treachery and bloodlust, the greatest of the pagan warriors, Abasimi, is killed by Archbishop Turban. Abasimi is described as the greatest and most vile villains in the Saracen army. Out in the front rides a Saracen, Absimi. King Marseille had no greater villain in his company, a man of evil traits and mighty treachery. He does not believe in God, the Son of the Virgin Mary, and is as black as molten pitch. He loves treachery and murder more than he would love all the gold in Galicia. No one has ever seen him play or laugh. He is a man of courage and great zeal, and thereby a friend to Marseille, the treacherous king. Notice how many times the poet makes sure we know that these pagan Saracen warriors are treacherous people. But not all the pagan warriors are hewn down in battle. Margarise, a very valiant knight, handsome, strong, swift, and nimble, attacks Oliver early in the battle. But this pagan warrior has spoken no lies about Charlemagne or the fair land of France. Margarise is not killed when he attacks Oliver, who in turn is spared by a miraculous intervention by God during their duel. This, I think, is worth remembering when observing the contrast of values. The pagan antagonists who utter lies are all killed at some point in the poem. The pagan antagonists, even if it's only for a few lines, who do not utter a lie, are spared. The graphic and grotesque description of killing in the Song of Roland mirrors that of the other great epic literature of antiquity. But by including commentary on the high virtues of fealty, honesty, and loyalty, it differs dramatically from the language of antique heroic literature. Homer, Virgil, and Statius, in their respective poems, simply describe the horrific deaths of those men slain in combat. The men who die in antique heroic literature die because of the audacity of their opponents, or the actions of the gods deflecting arrowheads and spear shafts. This is not the case in the Song of Roland. While the poem does describe in brutal and gory detail some of the killing blows, many of the pagan warriors who are slain, again, die because of some preceding act of lying and treachery on their part, which the poet feels the need to include before killing them off. The poet then could not make the association with lying and death any clearer than having men who lie quickly slain on the battlefield in the most gruesome of ways. Their eyes are gorged out of their sockets. Their faces are split in half by sword strikes. Their brains spill out of their helmet. Listeners of the poem would have no illusion about the severity of lying. Lying is a betrayal of truth, but it is also a betrayal of one's duty to king and land. Those who lie, thereby forsaking truth and betraying their oaths to king and land, must be struck down by the flaming sword of God and justice. Who, mind you, God in Christianity is truth itself. Thus those who lie do not honor God. There is also much emotion permeating through the poem. The death of Oliver breaks the heart of Roland. He clutches his friend in his arms as he passes from this world unto the gates of paradise. The death of Roland, the death of Archbishop Turpin, and the weeping of Charlemagne equally move the heart to pity and compassion. We are meant to weep alongside Charlemagne as he looks upon the mangled carcasses and corpses of his former friends and vassals. But the heart of the poem communicates the values of fealty to lord and land that are combined with duty, heroism, and trustworthiness. The struggle that dominates the core of the poem between the battle of King Marseille and Roland is not just the battle between Christianity and paganism. It is a battle for the soul of fealty and everything that 11th and 12th century France would have held so dearly. Insofar that Christianity is the religion which demands fealty to king and country, and is the religion of love that allows for one's love of king and country to consummate itself, Christianity is the supreme religion for the Frankish people and their martial values. The triumph of Roland is the triumph of fealty, and all that is entailed and encompassed in the virtues and values of fealty. In his devotion to Charlemagne and the fair land of France, Roland passed from this life into the next and was ushered into eternity. In fact, when Archbishop Turpin speaks to the men during the battle, he informs them to do their duty as lords and knights and to die as martyrs. This ensures life in paradise for them. The poet then, miraculously, sublimely marries tribal fealty to the highest reality offered in Christianity. Those who do their duty to lord and land reach the gates of paradise. And the archbishop told them what was on his mind. Lord barons, do not indulge in base thoughts. In God's name I beg you not to flee, so that no man of worth can sing a shameful song. It is far better for us to die fighting. We are promised this. Soon we shall meet our end. Beyond this day we shall cease to be alive. But in one thing I can act as a guarantor. Holy paradise open to you. You will take your seat among the innocents. At these words the Franks rejoice. The Song of Roland is a unique poem of the medieval world. The work blends Frankish Gothic fealty and feudalism with the theological virtues of Christianity in a remarkable synthesis that provides for action, energy, and emotion. All the liars in the play, including King Marseille, who is injured during the battle, eventually die. The liars die because they have betrayed the highest value of fealty, which is trustworthiness. That is, concretely manifested in duty to lord and land. There can be no mistaking the intent of this heroic song of valor. When Ganelon is hung, the poet says, if he were loyal, he would seem to have been the perfect baron. Fealty, loyalty, is the most important value communicated in the poem, and fealty is manifested by the love, duty, and loyalty to lord and land, even unto death. The triumph and immortality of Roland is nothing short of the triumph and immortality of the fealty demanded by lord and land, and consummated in the love of lord and land, to which we are willing to sacrifice our very lives. Those who actualize their fealty, the highest reality of which is sacrificial love to lord and land, as Archbishop Turpin guaranteed, enter the realm of holy paradise, where loving fealty to the supreme lord and land reigns forever and ever. In the Song of Roland, the anonymous poem blends Christianity and Gothic fealty and tribalism together. Those who are loyal to lord and land and die in service to lord and land are the very same as the Christian martyrs of old.